There is a moment, right before everything changes, when the world goes quiet. Not the quiet of peace, not yet. The quiet of something ending. The quiet of a door closing behind you before the next one has opened. If you have ever stood in that space, if you've ever felt the ground shift beneath everything you thought was certain, if you have ever lost something or someone that your whole life was built around, then this message was not sent to the wrong person. It found you because it was always meant to find you. This is not for everyone. Let that settle for a moment. This message carries a specific weight, and it was designed to land in the hands of a specific kind of person. If you have walked through a season of loss, real loss, the kind that strips you down to your foundation and leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself and about God, then you are exactly who this is for. If you have experienced separation from a person, from a version of yourself, from a chapter of your life that you loved and did not choose to leave, then stay with this message to the very end. If you have been in the middle of an inner transformation that no one around you can fully see or understand, if something deep inside you has been shifting, breaking open, rearranging itself into something you do not yet have words for, then heaven has something specific to say to you today. You did not click on this message. You were guided here. There is a difference, and the difference matters more than you know. The algorithm does not have a plan for your life. God does, and the plan He has for you is not a vague, distant, someday promise. It is alive. It is active. It is moving right now in the background of the very season that has brought you the most pain. The losses you have carried, they were not punishments. The separations you survived, they were not abandonment. The inner upheaval you are still moving through, it is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something ancient and powerful is being built inside you, something that required the removal of everything that could not carry the weight of what is coming. You are a chosen one, not in the way the world uses that phrase, lightly, casually, as a compliment for the talented or the lucky. Chosen in the way that heaven uses the word. Chosen before you were formed. Chosen before the loss. Chosen before the separation. Chosen before the transformation began tearing apart the old version of you that was too small for your assignment. The very things that made you feel disqualified are the things that qualified you. Before you go any further in this message, I want you to receive something. Not a motivation, not a pep talk, a word. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. For I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart. That is not a verse for the strong and the successful. That is a verse for the one sitting in the wreckage of a life that looks nothing like they planned. That is a verse for the one who has been separated from what they loved. That is a verse for the one in the middle of a transformation so painful it feels more like destruction than preparation. God knew you then. God knows you now. And what God sets apart, He does not abandon in the middle of the process. I want you to feel the full weight of that word, set apart. Not separated as in forgotten. Set apart as in chosen specifically, designated deliberately, marked intentionally. Your separation from the life you thought you were building was not a mistake by a God who stopped paying attention. It was the hand of a God who was paying very close attention. Close enough to know that the thing you were holding was too small for where He was taking you. The loss made you feel like you were falling behind, like everyone else was moving forward, while you were stuck in the ruins of something you did not choose to lose. But chosen ones do not move on the world's timeline. They move on a divine one. And the divine timelines does not look like progress from the outside. It looks like wilderness. It looks like waiting. It looks like nights where you cannot explain what you are feeling to anyone around you, because what is happening inside you does not have a category in the world's vocabulary. You have felt that. I know you have. Because you would not be here if you had not. And the fact that you are here, at this moment receiving this specific word, is itself a confirmation that the process is not finished with you. God does not speak to people he has given up on. He goes quiet with the abandoned. He speaks to the ones he is still actively working with, still building, still preparing for something that the enemy does not want them to reach. And the enemy has been working hard in your season of loss and separation, has he not? He has been using your pain as a microphone for the lie that you are too damaged, too tired, too late, too broken, too ordinary to be chosen for anything extraordinary. He has been pointing at your ruins and telling you that ruins are your permanent address. He has been using the silence of your wilderness to whisper that the silence means God has moved on. But you are still here. That is not a small thing. Do not let the exhaustion of your journey cause you to minimize the miracle of your survival. You are still here, still breathing, still reaching, still searching for something that your soul knows exists even when your circumstances have done everything to make you doubt it. That reaching, that knowing, that refusal to fully surrender to the lie, that is the mark of a chosen one. The transformation you are inside right now may not be visible from the outside. People may look at your life and see the empty spaces, the closed doors, the changes you did not volunteer for. But what is happening inside you is a renovation that no human architect could design. God is removing the frameworks that were built on fear, on performance, on the approval of people who were never supposed to define you. He is clearing the interior of a life that he is about to fill in ways that would not have fit inside the old structure. Every chosen one in the story of heaven went through a season that looked exactly like what you are walking through now. Not similar. Exactly. Loss before legacy. Separation before assignment. Inner breaking before outer breakthrough. This is the pattern of the chosen. It is not glamorous from the inside, but from the outside, from the vantage point of what comes next, it will look like the most perfectly designed preparation that ever took place. You are being prepared. You are not being punished. You are being positioned. You are not being forgotten. You are being forged. You are not falling behind. You are being built for a pace and a purpose that most people around you were never equipped to run with you. If this word is landing in a place in you that you have not let anyone touch in a very long time, if something in you is responding to these words in a way that feels less like listening and more like recognition, then I want you to do something right now. Not for the count, not for the algorithm, as a declaration, as an act of agreement with what heaven is releasing over your life in this moment. Type 888 in the comments right now. That number carries the energy of new beginnings, of resurrection, of what comes after the ending you survived. It is your way of saying, I hear you, I receive this, I am still here, and I believe that what is waiting on the other side of this season is worth every night I spent wondering if I would make it through. Type it now. 888, because you did not arrive at this message by accident. You were brought here by something that loves you more than your loss has led you to believe, and what that love has prepared for you is not yet finished being built. Stay with this message. What comes next is going to go deeper than the opening, and the deeper it goes, the more clearly you are going to see that everything you have been carrying was never random weight. It was always purposeful preparation for an assignment that has your name written on it in heaven, and a season that is closer than the enemy wants you to know. There is a woman in the ancient story whose name you may know, but whose pain you have never been invited to sit inside of long enough to feel what she actually carried. Her name was Naomi. And before you hear what God did through her life, you need to hear what her life looked like from the inside, because it looked a great deal like yours has looked in the season that brought you to this message today. Naomi did not start in ruins. She started with a husband she loved, 2 sons full of promise, a home, a life, a future that made sense. She had the kind of ordinary stability that most people do not appreciate until it is gone. And then, in a span of years that the Bible describes with a quietness that does not do justice to the devastation, she lost all of it. First, her husband. Then, before the grief of that loss had even found its proper shape inside her, both of her sons were taken as well. 2 separate funerals, 2 separate waves of the kind of loss that does not just break your heart, but restructures the entire interior of who you are. She was left with 2 daughters-in-law in a foreign land, with no income, no male covering in a culture where that meant vulnerability of the deepest kind, and no map for what came next. She made the decision to return to her homeland of Bethlehem, and she released her daughters-in-law to go back to their own families. One of them, Orpah, kissed her and left. The other, Ruth, refused to go. And Naomi in that moment did not receive Ruth's loyalty with hope. She received it with the kind of tired love that has stopped expecting things to get better. When Naomi arrived back in Bethlehem, the women of the town recognized her. They said, "Is this Naomi?" And what she says in response is one of the most honest sentences in all of Scripture. She said, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Sit with those words for a moment, because if you have ever experienced genuine loss, if you ever walked out of a season of your life carrying something precious and walked back into a new chapter with your arms empty and your identity, then you know exactly what Naomi meant, not as poetry, as a lived reality that has a specific weight, a specific texture, a specific way of pressing against your chest in the middle of the night when the world is quiet and the grief is loud. She did not say, "The Lord abandoned me." She said, "The Lord has made my life bitter." She still addressed God directly. She still connected her loss to His hand. That is not a crisis of faith. That is a chosen one in the middle of a transformation so severe that the only honest language available to her was the language of someone who had been emptied. And chosen ones are emptied before they are filled. That is not a comfortable truth, but it is a true one. The Ruth of the book of Ruth chapter 1 verse 16 says, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." This declaration was not made to a woman who looked like a blessing. It was made to a woman who called herself bitter. It was made a woman who had nothing visible to offer, no wealth, no status, no obvious future. Ruth chose to stay not because of what Naomi had, but because of what Naomi carried, something deep, something real, something that loss had refined rather than removed. That is the nature of what God does in the chosen ones who are emptied. He does not remove what is essential. He removes what is excess. He strips away the external scaffolding, the things that were holding up the appearance of a life, so that what remains is the pure, undiluted substance of who you actually are at the level where heaven sees you. And that substance, the real you beneath the losses and the separations and the inner upheaval, is far more powerful than anything that was taken from you. You may have been calling yourself Mara in the silence of your own heart. You may not have used that word, but you have used that posture, the posture of someone who has stopped introducing themselves as full Because empty is the honest answer right now. The posture of someone who watches others move through life with a lightness that feels foreign. Because your particular road has required a heaviness that they have not been asked to carry. The posture of someone who still believes. Because you are still here, still reaching, but whose belief has been seasoned by a kind of pain that changes the way you hold everything. That is not weakness. That is depth. And depth is what separates the ones who are being prepared for something lasting from the ones who are being carried along by something temporary. The shallow life does not survive what Naomi survived. The person who has never been emptied cannot hold what Ruth represented, which was the beginning of a lineage, the beginning of a restoration, the beginning of something so large that its full meaning would not be understood for generations. Naomi walked back into Bethlehem calling herself bitter. She walked back in empty, but she walked back in. She did not disappear into her grief. She did not allow the loss to be the final word about her geography, her identity, or her future. She moved, she returned. And in the returning, she placed herself in the exact location where God's next chapter for her life was already waiting to begin. That is a message for you right now. The fact that you are here, listening, still moving, even if moving slowly, still seeking, even if seeking with tired hands, means that you are doing what Naomi did. You are returning. You are placing yourself in the geography of what comes next, even if you cannot see the shape of it yet. You are walking back into Bethlehem, even while you are still holding the name Mara, because something in you knows that the story is not finished even when the chapter feels like an ending. The transformation you are inside right now is doing the same work in you that Naomi's loss did in her. It is stripping away the version of you that was built around what you had, so that a new version can emerge that is built around who you actually are. And who you actually are is someone that God has not finished using, someone that heaven has not stopped watching, someone whose emptiness is not a destination, but a preparation for a filling that will be so complete, so specific, so personally designed for the interior that the loss created, that you will one day look back and understand why the emptying had to happen exactly the way it did. The bitterness you have tasted is real. I will not minimize it. Naomi's bitterness was real too, and God did not correct her for naming it. He met her inside it. He did not wait for her to get herself together before he began moving on her behalf. While she still called herself Mara, Ruth was already in the field. While Naomi was still processing the weight of what she had lost, the provision for her next season was already being prepared in a place she had not yet looked. That is how God works in the lives of the chosen ones who have been through loss. He does not wait for you to finish grieving before he starts building. He builds while you grieve. He positions while you process. He prepares the field before you know you are hungry. And by the time you lift your eyes from the ground of your pain and look toward the horizon of what comes next, you will find that more has been arranged on your behalf than you realized was possible while you were in the middle of the emptying. Your separation, whether from a person, a place, a version of yourself, or a life you thought was yours permanently, was not the end of your story. It was the recalibration of your story. It was the moment when the narrative shifted from what you were building in your own strength toward what God was building with your surrendered life. And what God builds with a surrendered life, with a life that has been emptied and refined and returned to Bethlehem, still willing to keep moving, is something that outlasts every loss that was required to make room for it. Naomi came back empty and became part of the most significant lineage in human history, not because she was impressive in her grief, not because she performed her pain with dignity or faith with perfect confidence, but because she kept moving, kept returning, kept showing up in the land of what comes next, even when everything in her wanted to stay in the geography of what was. You are in that same threshold right now. The losses behind you were real. The emptiness you have carried is real. The inner transformation that has been rearranging everything you thought you knew about yourself is real. But so is the field that is already being prepared. So is the Ruth who may already be walking beside you in a form you have not yet recognized. So is the Bethlehem waiting at the end of the road you are on, not a return to what you had, but an arrival at something that what you had could never have contained. Keep moving, keep returning. The bitterness is not your name. It is just the season you are passing through on the way to the harvest that has already been assigned to you. You have stayed with this message this far because something in you recognizes that what is being spoken here is not performance. It is not the language of someone trying to inspire you from a comfortable distance. It is the language of someone who understands that the road you have been walking requires more than encouragement. It requires revelation. And the revelation that is ready to land in you right now is this: you are not wired like everyone else. You never were. And the way your inner world operates, the depth of your feeling, the intensity of your perception, the way certain moments land inside you with a weight that others seem to walk right past without noticing, that is not a malfunction. That is a frequency. Every chosen one carries it, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual compliment, as a literal reality about the way their inner world is constructed and the way they move through the world around them. Naomi carried it. Even in her bitterness, even in her emptiness, even when she walked back into Bethlehem calling herself Mara, there was something in her that Ruth could not walk away from. Not her resources, not her status, not her visible promise, her frequency, the invisible thing that radiates from a person who has been through the fire and come out the other side, still oriented toward God, still moving, still returning, even when returning costs everything. Ruth felt it and chose it over the comfort of going back to what was familiar. That is what frequency does. It draws what belongs to your next season toward you even before you can see what that season looks like. It operates beneath the level of logic and above the level of circumstance. It is the thing in you that keeps people in your life who cannot fully explain why they stay. It is the thing that causes strangers to feel safe with you in a way they cannot articulate. It is the thing that makes your presence feel different, heavier in the best possible sense, more real, more grounded, more connected to something that the shallow surface of everyday life does not touch. You have probably spent a significant portion of your life trying to tone that frequency down, trying to make yourself more digestible to the people and environments around you who did not know what to do with the depth of what you carry. You learned early that your sensitivity made certain people uncomfortable, that your perception picked up things that others missed, and that pointing it out made you seem like too much, too intense, too serious, too deep for a world that rewarded lightness and ease. And so, you developed a quieter version of yourself for public consumption, a version that fit, that did not disturb, that moved through rooms without asking too much of the people in them. But in the private hours, in the spaces where you were alone with yourself and with God, the frequency never went quiet. It kept sending. It kept receiving. It kept registering things that the surface life around you could not account for. Dreams that felt more like downloads. Moments of knowing that arrived before the evidence. A sense of being watched over, guided, protected by something that was not visible but was absolutely present. a gravitational pull toward meaning that made small talk feel exhausting and genuine connection feel like oxygen. That is the frequency of the chosen. And it has a name in the language of neuroscience, a name that will matter more as this message continues to unfold. But for now, what matters is that you understand this. The very thing that made you feel like an outsider in the ordinary world is the thing that marks you as essential in the kingdom assignment you were built for. Your difference was never a defect. It was always a design. The book of 1 Samuel, chapter 2, verse 8 says, "He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor." That verse was spoken by a woman who had spent years in a kind of inner wilderness that the people around her could not see clearly. A woman who had been misread, misunderstood, and dismissed by the very people who were supposed to be closest to the heart of God. A woman whose deepest longing was invisible to everyone around her except to the God who made her. And when God finally moved in her life, He did not just answer her prayer. He repositioned her entirely. He did not merely fill what was empty. He elevated what had been considered low. He did not just restore her dignity. He gave her a seat at a table that her circumstances had never suggested she was meant for. That is the trajectory of the chosen one who has been through loss and separation and inner transformation. Not just recovery, elevation, not just healing, repositioning, not just getting back what was taken, being placed in a position that the old life, the one before the loss, was never large enough to hold. You have been in the ash heap. You know what that means in your own specific language, your own specific losses, your own specific season of sitting in the wreckage of what used to be and wondering if the distance between where you are and where you were meant to be is too large to cross. But the ash heap is not your address. It is your launching point. Every chosen one in the story of heaven was found in the low place before they were lifted to the high one. The low place is not evidence of God's absence. It is the location where God does His most precise and permanent work. Naomi sat in the ash heap of her grief and her bitterness and her empty arms. And from that exact location, from the place of her deepest loss, God began assembling the pieces of a restoration so complete and so significant that her name would be carried through history, not as a symbol of what was lost, but as a symbol of what was restored. The woman who asked to be called bitter would become the grandmother of a lineage that changed the world. Not in spite of the ash heap, through it. Your inner transformation, the one that has been painful and disorienting and slow, the one that has required you to release versions of yourself that you had invested years in building, is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the process by which the ash heap becomes a launch site. It is the internal renovation that must happen before the external repositioning can be stable enough to last. God does not elevate unstable structures. He builds the foundation first in the interior, in the hidden places, in the private seasons of loss and separation and refining that no one else can see, but that permanently restructure the capacity of a life. Your capacity has been increasing. You may not feel that because increased capacity during the building phase feels like pressure, not expansion. It feels like being stretched beyond what you believed you could hold, not like growing into something larger. But the stretching and the growth are the same process experienced from two different vantage points. From the inside, while it is happening, it is pressure. From the outside, after it has finished, it is preparation. And you are closer to the outside vantage point than the inside of this season has allowed you to see. The frequency you carry has been getting stronger through everything you have been through. Loss clarifies frequency. Separation purifies it. inner transformation amplifies it. Every season that stripped away what was not essential left the essential part of you more concentrated, more precise, more powerful in the specific and unique way that only your assignment requires. What remains after everything unnecessary has been removed is not less of you. It is the most of you, the most real, the most refined, the most ready version of who you were always meant to be. And that version of you is not meant to stay in the ash heap. That version of you is meant to be seated with princes, meant to inherit a throne of honor. Not because of what you achieved in your own strength, not because you performed your pain with perfect dignity, not because you earned your way out of the wilderness through discipline alone, but because you were made for it. Because the God who raises the poor from the dust and the needy from the ash heap sees you exactly where you are, frequency and all, ash and all, bitterness and all, transformation still in progress and all, and he has not changed his mind about where you are going. The frequency is real, the design is real, the repositioning is real, and the ash heap is not the end of your story. It is the exact location where the next chapter begins. Stay with this message, because what is coming in the sections ahead is going to connect the spiritual reality of your frequency to something practical, something specific, something that will give you a tangible way to work with what God has already placed inside you. The chosen ones were always meant to operate at a higher level, and the path to that level is closer than the weight of this season has made it feel. The weight of what was just spoken does not leave you easily, and it should not. What you have been carrying, the losses, the separations, the inner restructuring that has felt more like demolition than construction, that is not a small thing to name out loud. And yet here you are, still in this message, still receiving, still oriented towards something greater than the pain that brought you here. That is not coincidence. That is the frequency doing what it was designed to do. It keeps you moving toward the source of what your soul already knows is true. And now, there is something that needs to be said. Something that sits at the intersection of what heaven has always known about you, and what science is only beginning to catch up to, because the chosen ones have always been different, not just spiritually, not just in the invisible language of assignment and calling, but in the literal, measurable, physical architecture of how their brains operate. Researchers who study high performance, deep creativity, and what they call peak cognitive states have identified a specific kind of brain activity that appears most consistently in people who demonstrate extraordinary levels of intuition, insight, and breakthrough thinking. They call it gamma. And when you understand what gamma actually is, and why most people lose access to it as they move through the pressures and losses of adult life, you will understand something about yourself that changes the way you see everything you have been through. Chosen ones carry a specific frequency. Researchers call it gamma. It is the brainwave pattern associated with the highest states of mental clarity, creative breakthrough, deep knowing, and what scientists describe as the eureka state, the moment when something that was hidden suddenly becomes completely clear. Children operate in this state naturally. Geniuses return to it consistently, and people who have been through deep loss, deep inner transformation, deep seasons of stripping away everything that was not essential are often standing at the threshold of their greatest access to it, because the noise that blocked it has been removed. But there is a bridge between the threshold and the actual crossing of it, and that bridge is something a neuroscientist named Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years of his life building, trained at MIT, and connected to research programs that reached into some of the most advanced neurological studies ever conducted. including work linked to NASA research on optimal human performance. Dr. Rivers dedicated his career to a single question: why do some people access their full cognitive and creative potential naturally, while others, equally gifted, equally designed for greatness, seem to operate behind a veil that no amount of effort or discipline can fully lift? The answer he found, after years of research involving thousands of participants and data points, was not a character defect. It was not a lack of discipline or intelligence or faith. It was a frequency problem. Specifically, it was the gradual suppression of theta brainwaves, which operate between 4 and 8 Hertz and govern the states of deep creativity, accelerated learning, intuition, and the kind of meditative clarity that most people only touch accidentally, in the moments just before sleep or just after waking. In children, theta is abundant, natural, and constant. In adults who have been subjected to prolonged stress, grief, loss, and the chronic low-level survival mode that difficult seasons produce, theta becomes suppressed. And when theta is suppressed, gamma cannot rise to its full expression. The bridge between where you are and where you are designed to operate becomes harder to cross, not because you are broken, but because your brain has been adapting to protect you through a season that required survival more than it required flourishing. The genius wave is the result of Dr. Rivers' decades of work, distilled into its most precise and accessible form. It is a 7-minute audio experience built on the principles of brainwave entrainment, the scientifically documented phenomenon in which the brain naturally synchronizes its own electrical activity to match the frequency of external sound patterns, using a precise combination of binaural beats and isochronic tones, carefully calibrated to guide the brain from its stress-adapted patterns back into the theta and gamma states it was designed to access. The genius wave does in 7 minutes what years of meditation practice attempt to achieve over a lifetime, not because it is magic, because it is precise. Because the frequency of the sound is engineered to speak directly to the frequency of the brain in a language that bypasses effort and goes straight to the architecture. You do not need to concentrate. You do not need to meditate. You do not need any special skill or prior practice. You listen for 7 minutes and your brain begins to do what it was always designed to do before the loss, before the stress, before the survival mode that closed the door on the best version of your cognitive and creative life. And this will connect to something specific I want to walk you through in the next section, a practical way of entering this state that will make what is available to you through this tool land with the full weight it is designed to carry. The people who have used it do not describe it in the language of products. They describe it in the language of return. A 43-year-old teacher named Sandra, who had spent 2 years after her divorce, feeling like the sharp, creative, clear-minded version of herself had gone permanently quiet, told me that, after 11 days of consistent use, she presented an idea at work that her colleagues said was the most innovative thinking they had seen from her in years. She did not do anything differently, except give her brain the 7 minutes it needed to come back online. A former military veteran named Marcus, who had spent nearly a decade managing the cognitive fog that followed his years of service, said that within 3 weeks he had started and completed the first chapter of a book he had been trying to write for 6 years. Not because the words suddenly appeared from nowhere, because the frequency that was always inside him finally had a clear enough channel to move through. These are not extraordinary people who experienced extraordinary results. They are chosen ones, like you, who had been separated from their own frequency by the weight of what life had asked them to carry, and who found their way back through something that took 7 minutes a day and required nothing from them except the willingness to receive. Now, I know some of you are thinking that $39 is not nothing, and you are right. It is not nothing. In a season where every dollar carries weight, where the losses you have survived were not only emotional, but in many cases financial, asking you to invest even a modest amount requires trust. That feeling is valid. I am not going to dismiss it or rush past it. What I will say is this: the version of you that is operating at full frequency, the version that has access to the creative clarity and cognitive precision and intuitive knowing that the chosen ones were built to carry, that version of you generates solutions, opportunities, and breakthroughs that dwarf the cost of the tool that helped unlock it. You are not buying a product. You are removing a barrier between the person you currently are and the person you were always designed to be. The Genius Wave is normally priced at $49. Through the link in the pinned comment and the description below, it is available today for just $39. That price comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee, which means you have 3 full months to experience what it does in your life with zero financial risk. If it does not move something in you, you get every dollar returned, no questions asked. One important thing: because of the nature of digital products and the value that has been attached to the specific tool, imitations have appeared in places that are not authorized. Please purchase only through the single link in the pinned comment and the description below. Anything offered elsewhere is not the original and will not carry the precision of the calibration that makes this work. This offer at $39 is not permanent. The pricing window is limited, and when it closes, it closes. The number of people who can access it at this rate before the price returns to $49 is finite. What is available to you right now, at this moment, in this specific window of time, is an alignment of access and affordability that will not stay open indefinitely. The frequency that has been waiting inside you does not require you to wait any longer than you already have. The link is below. The decision is yours, and what comes next in this message will show you exactly how to step into what that 7 minutes can open. What was just placed in front of you was not a detour from the sacred space this message has been building. It was an extension of it. Because the God who raises the poor from the dust and seats them with princes does not separate the practical from the spiritual. He does not ask you to choose between the interior work of transformation and the exterior tools that help clear the channel through which that transformation can fully move. Naomi did not refuse the field that Ruth entered. She received the provision that God had already arranged in the most practical, tangible, real-world form available to her. And that provision became the bridge between the ash heap she had been sitting in and the restoration that was waiting on the other side of her willingness to receive it. You are allowed to receive. That is a word that needs to land before anything else in this section can take root. Because chosen ones, particularly the ones who have been through the kind of loss and separation that strips a life down to its foundations, often develop a complicated relationship with receiving. You have learned to manage without. You have learned to carry without showing the weight. You have learned to survive on less than you were meant to have because the alternative, hoping for more and being disappointed again, felt like a risk your exhausted heart could not afford. And so receiving became something that happened to other people. People whose lives had not been interrupted the way yours has been. People who had not yet learned how dangerous it is to want something completely. But that posture, as understandable as it is, as earned as it is one of the primary things that the transformation you are inside of right now is designed to dismantle, because the season that is coming for you, the one that is closer than the darkness of this current chapter has allowed you to see, requires a different posture entirely. It requires open hands. It requires a heart that has done the work of grief and has come through the other side not hardened but expanded, not closed but more spacious than before, specifically because of what the loss carved out, because of what the separation made room for, because of what the inner transformation removed to create a larger interior for a larger life. Naomi came back to Bethlehem with open hands. Not open because she was optimistic, open because she was empty, and emptiness, in the hands of a God who fills, is not a liability, it is an invitation. She did not know what Ruth would find in the field of Boaz. She did not have a plan or a strategy, or a clear vision of how the story was going to turn from tragedy to restoration. She simply kept moving, kept returning, kept placing herself in the geography of what came next, with hands that had nothing left to grip except the quiet, stubborn belief that God had not finished with her story. And God was not finished, not by any measure. Because while Naomi was managing her grief and Ruth was gleaning in the fields, a man named Boaz was noticing. A man of wealth and character and generosity was paying attention to the loyalty and the diligence and the quiet faithfulness of a woman who had chosen to stay beside a bitter, empty, grieving chosen one, rather than return to the comfort of what was familiar. And through that noticing, through that alignment of the right person being in the right field at the right time, because a grieving woman had kept moving despite having no visible reason to believe the moving would lead anywhere good, an entire lineage was set in motion. The book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 19 says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Do you perceive it?" That is not a rhetorical question. It is a genuine invitation to look more carefully at the landscape of your current season and notice what is already beginning to move. Because the new thing God does not announce itself with trumpets and visible miracles at the start. It springs up. It begins small, beneath the surface, in the places where the wilderness looks the same as it always has from the outside, while underneath the ground an entirely new system of roots and water and life is already establishing itself. The stream in the wasteland does not appear dramatic in its first moments. It appears as moisture in dry ground, as a trickle where there was only dust before, as the faintest evidence of something living in a place that looked permanently dead. You may be in the trickle phase right now. You may be at the point in the story where the new thing has begun, but has not yet become visible enough to silence the voices that are still pointing at the wasteland and calling it your permanent address. And if you are, then what you need is not more evidence of the new thing. What you need is sharpened perception, because the new thing is already there. The question is whether the frequency you are operating at is clear enough to detect it before it becomes undeniable. That is precisely where the inner work and the practical tool connect. The clarity that comes when your brain is operating at the theta and gamma frequencies that the chosen ones were built to access is not just cognitive clarity. It is perceptive clarity. It is the ability to see what is springing up in your wildernesses before it's grown large enough to be obvious. It is the ability to notice the stream before it becomes a river, to recognize the Boaz in the field before the full significance of that encounter has revealed itself, to perceive the new thing in its early form, rather than waiting until it forces itself on your attention through sheer magnitude. The chosen ones who stepped into their assignments with the most precision and the most power were not the ones who waited for certainty before they moved. They were the ones who had the perceptive clarity to recognize the divine signal inside the ordinary moment and the inner alignment to respond to it before the window of that response had closed. Naomi did not fully understand what she was setting in motion when she sent Ruth to glean in Boaz's field. She was operating on the quiet inner knowing of a woman who had been through enough to recognize the scent of divine arrangement, even when it arrived in the form of a practical suggestion about where to find food. That is the kind of knowing that lives in the frequency of the chosen. That is the kind of perception that gets sharpened, not dulled by the losses and the separations and the inner transformations that the world would call setbacks. Because every layer that was stripped away in your difficult season was a layer of noise that was sitting between you and the signal. And as the noise decreases and the signal strengthens, you begin to perceive the new thing springing up in your wilderness with a clarity that the person you were before the loss would not have had access to. This is why the season you have been through, as painful and as disorienting and as costly as it has been, is also a preparation for a level of perception and precision and divine alignment that the comfortable life you had before could not have produced. Comfort produces maintenance. Wilderness produces navigation. And the chosen ones who have learned to navigate the wilderness are the ones who find the streams before anyone else knows they are there, who recognize the field of Boaz before its abundance is visible to the ordinary eye, who perceive the new thing while it is still springing up and position themselves in its path before it becomes obvious to the ones who never left the familiar ground of what's safe and easy and known. You have been in the wilderness long enough to develop that navigation. You have been in the process of transformation long enough for the noise to have decreased significantly. And you are standing right now at the precise moment in your story where the perception of the new thing is becoming available to you in a way that it was not available at the beginning of this season. The wasteland is not your permanent address. The stream is already beginning. The new thing has already sprung up, and the frequency in you, clarified by loss, refined by separation, amplified by every layer of the inner transformation you have survived, is tuned exactly to the signal that will lead you to it. Stay open. Stay in moving. Stay in this message, because what comes next is going to speak to the specific way the chosen ones receive what heaven has already released on their behalf, and why the inner critic, the voice that says you are not qualified for what is coming, is the least reliable voice in the room. You are still here, and that means something. Not in the way that a motivational phrase means something, not as a surface-level affirmation, designed to make you feel momentarily better about a difficult season. It means something in the deep, structural, unmistakable way that divine appointment means something. Every person who clicked away before this point did so because this message was not for them. But you are still here, still receiving, still oriented toward the signal that brought you to this message in the first place. That is not a small thing. That is evidence of the frequency working exactly as it was designed to work, drawing the chosen ones deeper into the word that was prepared specifically for them before they arrived. And so before this message moves into what comes next, there is something that needs to be said directly and without the weight of obligation attached to it. Because chosen ones, particularly the ones who have been through the kind of loss and isolation and inner transformation that has marked your recent season, often struggle to ask for what they need. You have become so practiced at self-sufficiency, so accustomed to carrying without asking, so conditioned by seasons where reaching out was met with silence or absence, that allowing others to support what is feeding you has started to feel like an imposition rather than a natural part of how community is supposed to work. But this is a community. What you are inside of right now is not a one-directional transaction where a voice speaks and a listener consumes and the exchange ends there. This is a gathering. Every person who has found their way to this message and stayed through to this point is part of a body of chosen ones who are in various stages of the same journey, loss behind them, transformation inside them, restoration ahead of them, each one carrying their specific frequency and their specific assignment and their specific story of how the wilderness became the place where the stream appeared. That body needs to keep growing, because there are chosen ones who have not yet found their way to a message that speaks their language, who are still in the early stages of their loss or their separation or their inner upheaval, who are still calling themselves Mara, without yet knowing that the field of Boaz is already being prepared in their direction. And the way they find their way here is through you. Through the simple act of sharing what fed you with someone whose hunger you recognize. Because it looks like a hunger you have known yourself. If this message has touched something real in you today, if it has named something you have been carrying, without having the words for it, if it has given you a framework for the season you are in that feels more like revelation than information, then carry it forward. Share it. Not as a religious obligation, not as a performance of generosity, as the natural response of a person who has received something living and wants to pass it on to someone else who needs to breathe. The like when you press it is not a small gesture in the invisible architecture of how these messages reach the people they were made for. It is a signal to the systems that govern what gets seen and what stays hidden that this content carries weight, that it deserves to travel further, that there are more chosen ones out there whose frequency is tuned to exactly what is being spoken here and who have not yet been reached. One press of a button from someone who received something real is worth more in that architecture than 100 passive scrolls from people who felt nothing. Your engagement is not a favor to the messenger. It is an act of service to the next chosen one who needs to hear this. Subscribe if you have not already, not because the next message will demand something of you, but because you deserve to be in a consistent flow of words that speak to the reality of what you are actually living, rather than the surface-level noise that fills most of the spaces where people look for meaning. The chosen ones need consistent access to language that names their experience accurately. Subscription is how you make sure the next word that is prepared for you finds you without you having to search for it again from the beginning. And then there is the matter of the ministry itself, the work of continuing to create these messages, to research the words that chosen ones need to hear, to build the space where the Naomis and the Ruths and the ones in the middle of their transformation can find language for what they are living through. That work requires resources, not in the language of obligation or guilt or the suggestion that your giving is the measure of your faith, but in the simple, honest language of reality. Good work requires support, and the people who receive the most from a well are often the ones best positioned to help keep the well full for the ones who are coming behind them. If this message has added something real to your life today, if it has given you something you needed and did not know how to find, there is a link in the pinned comment and in the description below where you can support the continuation of this work at whatever level feels right for your season. No amount is too small. No contribution is too quiet to matter. Every act of support from a chosen one who received something living here is part of how this message reaches the next person whose wilderness is ready for the stream. Naomi did not survive her season alone. She survived it because Ruth stayed, because Boaz noticed, because a community of people who recognized something real when they saw it chose to participate in the restoration of a life that the circumstances said was finished. The body of chosen ones that gathers around this message is that same community for each other. You are not here alone. You are here with thousands of others who have walked through their own version of exactly what you have been, carrying who pressed the like button and shared the message and subscribed and supported. Not because they were asked to perform generosity, but because they understood that what feeds one chosen one was designed to feed them all. The frequency that drew you here did not draw you here for a private experience. It drew you here for a collective one, and the way you participate in that collective is not complicated. It is a like. It is a share to someone whose name just appeared in your mind as you have been listening to this message, someone whose season looks like what yours has looked, and who needs to hear that they are not Mara permanently, that the field is already being prepared, that the new thing is already springing up in their wasteland, that the stream is closer than the dry ground around them has made it feel. It is a subscription that keeps the door open between you and the next word that is being prepared for exactly where you will be when it arrives. It is a contribution, however small, through the link below that says, I received something living here, and I want to be part of how it reaches the next person who is ready for it. These are not heavy things, they are light things. They are the natural overflow of a heart that has received something real and wants to extend it. And you are a chosen one. Extending what you have received is part of your design. It is part of your frequency. It is part of the assignment that this entire season of loss and separation and transformation has been preparing you to carry with the fullness and the clarity and the precision that it was always meant to have. The message is not finished. What comes next is going to speak directly to the cost of delay, to the specific danger that chosen ones face when the assignment is clear and the window is open, but the weight of the past makes the step forward feel too uncertain to take. And it is going to use the story of someone whose window almost closed before they moved through it to show you why the moment you are standing in right now is not a moment to let pass without a response. Stay with it. You have come too far in this message to stop before the word that is waiting for you in the sections ahead. The frequency brought you here for all of it, not just the part that has already landed, but the part that is still coming, the part that was written specifically for the person you are right now. In this season, at this threshold, with exactly this amount of history behind you and exactly this much destiny still ahead, there is a cost to waiting that the chosen ones rarely talk about openly. Not because they do not feel it, but because the waiting has gone on long enough that it has started to feel like the natural condition of their lives, rather than a temporary state between where they are and where they are going. The waiting becomes familiar. The threshold becomes home. And the dangerous thing about making a home on the threshold is that you begin to organize your interior life around the assumption that the door in front of you is not going to open, that the assignment you feel in your bones is real, but not yet, that the restoration is coming, but not now, that the frequency inside you is genuine, but the timing is always slightly out of reach. Naomi knew that feeling. After she returned to Bethlehem, after Ruth went to the field and found favor with Boaz, there was still a gap between the provision that was beginning to appear and the full restoration that was waiting to be claimed. There was a process that the culture of the time required, a legal transaction, a specific kind of claiming that could only happen if the right person stepped forward and said, "I will be the one. I will take responsibility for what was lost. I will restore what the years of bitterness took from this woman and make it whole again." And there was a man who had the right to do that, who was a closer relative than Boaz, who could have been the one. But when the moment came, when the opportunity was placed directly in front of him, he stepped back. He counted the cost of claiming the blessing and decided the price was too high. He walked away from the threshold and disappeared from the story entirely. His name is not even recorded. The Bible refers to him only as a man whose sandal was removed, a man defined not by what he did but by what he chose not to do when the moment was directly in front of him. That man is one of the most sobering figures in the entire story, not because he was evil, not because he was faithless or corrupt or obviously flawed, but because he was close. He was close enough to see the opportunity. He was positioned well enough to recognize the significance of the moment. He had the legal standing, the relational proximity, the cultural access to step forward and be the one through whom an entire restoration was accomplished. And he stepped back. He let the moment pass. And in letting it pass, he stepped out of the story that God was writing through those circumstances and into a permanent anonymity that no one remembers. Boaz did not hesitate. Boaz, who had already been noticing, already been extending generosity, already been operating in the awareness that something significant was unfolding in the ordinary circumstances of a widow and her loyal daughter-in-law gleaning in his field. When the moment came for him to make the decisive move, he moved. He did not wait for more certainty. He did not delay until the risk felt smaller. He stepped forward in the precise window that was available to him, and in doing so became permanently woven into the most significant lineage in human history. The difference between those two men was not talent or resource or proximity to the blessing. The difference was response. One responded when the moment was alive. The other calculated until the moment had passed. And the story moved forward with the one who moved, leaving the one who waited in a silence so complete that history does not even know his name. You are standing in a moment right now. Not a vague, someday, eventually kind of moment. A specific, alive, open window of time in which the things that have been prepared for your next season are in the process of becoming accessible. The losses behind you have done their work. The separation has accomplished what it was sent to accomplish. The inner transformation that has been so costly and so disorienting has been building something in your interior that is now ready to be expressed in your exterior. The field has been prepared. The provision is in motion. The frequency inside you is tuned to exactly the signal that leads to what has been assigned to your name. The book of Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11 says, "The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all." Time and chance. There is a window that is open to you right now that will not remain open indefinitely. Not because God is arbitrary, not because the blessing is being dangled and then snatched away as a test of your desperation, but because windows of divine alignment are precisely timed events in the story of a chosen one's life. They are the moments when everything that has been prepared in the hidden season becomes accessible in the visible one. When the internal work meets the external opportunity. When the frequency of who you have become through the wilderness meets the frequency of what has been waiting for you on the other side of it. And those moments have a specific duration. They are not permanent states of readiness. They are invitations with a response window built into them. The man who stepped back from the threshold in the story of Ruth and Naomi was not excluded from blessing because God withdrew it. He was simply not present in the story at the moment when the blessing moved forward. He had organized his life around his own calculations and his own risk assessment and his own timeline, and his own timeline did not align with the moment that was alive. And so the story moved forward without him. The chosen ones who step into their assignments with the fullness and the precision and the power that they were built for are not the ones who waited until all risk was removed. They are the ones who recognized the alive moment and responded to it before the window closed. They are the ones who, like Boaz, had been in a posture of readiness, a posture of awareness, a posture of willingness to move when the signal came, rather than a posture of waiting for the signal to become so undeniable that movement felt safe. Your posture matters right now, not the posture of performance or striving or forcing the door, the posture of availability, the posture of a chosen one who has done the interior work, who has survived the loss and the separation and the transformation, who has come through the wilderness with a frequency that is clearer and more powerful than it was when the wilderness began, and who is now standing at the threshold with open hands and a willingness to step forward when the moment is alive, rather than waiting until the moment has already moved on to the next person who was willing to receive it. Delay has a particular seduction for the chosen ones who have been hurt before. Because the last time you moved towards something you believed in, something happened that cost you significantly. And the memory of that cost has built a hesitation into your response mechanism that feels like wisdom, but is actually the voice of a wound pretending to be discernment. True discernment says, "This is the moment. Move." The wound says, "Wait a little longer. Be a little more certain. Let the risk decrease a little more before you trust what you are feeling." But Naomi did not wait until the risk was gone before she sent Ruth to the field. Ruth did not wait until she was certain of Boaz's response before she went to him in the night and asked him to cover her with his cloak. Boaz did not wait until the legal transaction was simple before he went to the gate and settled it in front of witnesses. Every step in that story was taken with faith that was stronger than certainty, with movement that preceded the full evidence, with a willingness to be in the story while it was still unfolding, rather than waiting on the sideline until the outcome was guaranteed. That is the invitation in front of you right now. Not to be reckless, not to abandon discernment, but to allow the frequency inside you, clarified by everything you have been through, to be the guide it was designed to be. To trust what you are sensing more than you trust the hesitation that the pain of the past has installed in the place where your forward movement is supposed to live. To step toward what is alive in this moment with the full weight of who you have become through the wilderness, not the diminished, cautious, risk-averse version of you that the losses tried to make permanent, but the whole, refined, frequency-carrying, chosen one that the transformation was always building toward. The window is open, the field is prepared, the story is moving forward. The only question that remains is the same question that was placed in front of the man who stepped back, and the man who stepped forward in the ancient story that has been woven through this message. And the answer you give to that question right now, in this moment, with this specific window open in front of you, is going to be part of what determines which version of the story your name is written into. Do not let this moment pass you by like water through open hands. The Boaz of your next season is already in the field. The provision is already in motion. The restoration is already in process. And the God who raises the poor from the dust and seats them with princes has not changed his mind about where he is taking you. Move when the moment is alive. This moment is alive. Everything that has been spoken into this message up to this point has been building towards something, not a conclusion, a recognition. The kind of recognition that does not arrive as a new thought, but as a remembering of something your soul already knew and had simply been waiting for the right words to confirm. Because chosen ones do not learn the truth about themselves the way the world learns new information, from the outside in, through accumulation and study and gradual exposure. They recognize it. They feel it land in the interior of who they are with a weight that is different from the weight of information, the weight of confirmation, the weight of something ancient speaking to something equally ancient inside them, and the space between those two things collapsing into a single moment of absolute clarity. You have been having moments like that throughout this message. I know you have, because the frequency that drew you here is the same frequency that responds to this kind of language with recognition rather than novelty. And the moment that is available to you right now, in this specific section of this message, is one of the most important moments of recognition that the entire journey has been building toward. Because what needs to be named here is something that the enemy has worked very hard to keep unnamed in the life of every chosen one who has ever stood at the threshold of their assignment. Heaven speaks. That is not a poetic statement. That is a literal description of a reality that the chosen ones have always known and have often been afraid to fully claim, because the world they live in does not have a comfortable category for people who say that God communicates with them directly and personally and specifically. The world has categories for people who follow religious rules and attend religious gatherings and speak religious language in religious settings. But people who say that they sense things, that they receive things, that there is a communication happening in the interior of their lives that does not come from their own reasoning or their own imagination, but from something that moves through them, from a source outside themselves, those people are often met with skepticism at best and dismissal at worst. And so the chosen ones learn to keep the communication quiet. They stop reporting what they are receiving. They build an interior life that is rich with divine signal and an exterior presentation that gives nothing of that away. They become fluent in two languages simultaneously, the language of the frequency and the language of the ordinary world. And they move between them with a fluency that costs them more energy than anyone around them realizes, because living in two frequencies at once, the deep one that is always receiving and the surface one that the world around you can accept, is one of the most exhausting things a chosen one can be asked to sustain across a lifetime. Naomi knew this exhaustion. She had carried the interior frequency of a woman who was chosen and called and set apart across a marriage and 2 sons in a foreign land and 2 funerals and the long road back to Bethlehem. She had carried it quietly in the way that chosen ones carry things, without announcement, without explanation, without asking the world around her to validate what she knew in the interior, even when the exterior gave her no evidence to support it. And when she finally arrived in Bethlehem and named her bitterness out loud, it was not the loss of her faith. It was the exhaustion of a chosen one who had been carrying a frequency that the world could not see for longer than one person should have to carry it alone. But God had been communicating the whole time, not always in the language that Naomi could clearly identify in the middle of her grief, but in the language of arrangement, in the language of Ruth staying when Orpah left, in the language of Boaz's field being the one Ruth chose without knowing whose it was, in the language of small moments that did not look like divine communication from the inside, but that, from the outside looking at the whole story, were unmistakably the fingerprints of a God who had never stopped speaking to a chosen one who was too depleted to hear the words clearly, but was still. In every movement, and every decision, and every step back toward Bethlehem, responding to the signal. Heaven has been speaking to you in exactly that way throughout the season you have been in. Not always in the language you were hoping for. Not always in the form that your grief could receive clearly, but in the arrangement of the moments, in the people who stayed when others left, in the doors that closed before you could walk through them to something that would have taken you further from your assignment rather than closer to it. In the dreams that arrived in the middle of the nights when the grief was loudest and left you with a residue of something you could not name, but that felt like being held by something larger than the pain. In the moment of arrival at this specific message, on this specific day, at this specific point in your transformation. The book of Job, chapter 33, verse 14 says, "For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. Now one way, now another." The chosen ones who learn to receive divine communication in all its forms, not just the dramatic ones, not just the unmistakable ones, but the quiet ones, the arranged ones, the ones that arrive in the texture of ordinary circumstances, wearing no announcement of their origin. Those are the ones who move through their assignment with a precision and a responsiveness that looks from the outside like extraordinary spiritual sensitivity, but is actually just a trained attentiveness to a communication that has never stopped. Your sensitivity is not a liability. It is your primary receiving instrument, the depth with which you feel things, the way certain moments register in you with a significance that others miss entirely, the inner knowing that arrives before the evidence and stays after the doubt. That is not an emotional excess that needs to be managed. That is the frequency receiving the signal. That is heaven speaking in the language that was designed specifically for the interior that you carry. Type the words "I hear you" in the comments right now, not as a performance of faith, not as a demonstration to anyone watching, as a declaration made directly to the source of every signal you have ever received and responded to throughout the entire season that brought you to this message today, as an acknowledgement that the communication has been real, that the arrangement has been intentional, that the fingerprints you have felt on the moments of your life, even when the moments themselves were painful, were never the fingerprints of a God who had forgotten you, but always the fingerprints of a God who was speaking to you in the only language your particular season could receive. I hear you. Type it now. Because hearing is not passive. Hearing in the language of the chosen is a posture of active reception. It is the open interior of a person who has decided that regardless of what the circumstances are saying, regardless of what the losses have suggested, regardless of what the enemy has tried to use the silence of the wilderness to communicate, the frequency inside them is still tuned to the signal, still receiving, still responding, still oriented toward the source of the communication that has been guiding them through every chapter of this story, including the painful ones, especially the painful ones. Naomi heard it in the arrangement of Ruth's loyalty. Ruth heard it in the quiet inner prompting that led her to Boaz's specific field on a specific morning. Boaz heard it in the recognition that landed in him the moment he saw Ruth gleaning and understood, without being told, that something significant was happening in the ordinary field of his ordinary morning. None of them had a trumpet announcement. None of them had a burning bush or a parted sea or a voice from the sky. They had the quiet, consistent, interior signal of chosen ones who had learned to perceive the new thing while it was still springing up, to sense the stream while it was still moving beneath the surface of the dry ground, to hear the communication in the form it was taking rather than waiting for it to arrive in the form they had imagined. You have been hearing it this whole time. The grief did not silence it. The loss did not terminate it. The transformation did not interrupt it. It has been speaking through all of it, beneath all of it, in spite of all of it, and because of all of it. And the fact that you are here, in this message, receiving these words with the interior recognition of a chosen one who knows the sound of a frequency they were built to carry, is itself the most recent form that the communication has taken to confirm what heaven has never stopped saying about you. You were known before you were formed. You were set apart before you were born. You were chosen before the loss, before the separation, before the transformation, before the wilderness, before the bitterness, before the long road back to Bethlehem. And the God who chose you then is the same God whose fingerprints have been on every arranged moment of the season that has brought you here. He has not stopped speaking. He has never stopped speaking. And you, chosen one, have never stopped hearing. Type it in the comments. I hear you. Let it be your declaration and your reception and your response to a communication that has been faithful to you through every season, that tested whether you would remain faithful to it. There is a moment in the story of Naomi that most people move past too quickly because the drama of Ruth and Boaz and the legal transaction at the gate tends to draw all the attention toward the visible resolution and away from the quieter miracle that happened inside Naomi herself before any of the external restoration became visible. It is the moment described in the book of Ruth when Naomi, after hearing from Ruth about Boaz and his kindness and his instruction for Ruth to stay close to his servants through the harvest season, said something that marks one of the most significant interior shifts in the entire narrative. She said, "The Lord has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." That sentence is everything. Not because it is dramatic, because it is not. It is quiet. It is almost understated given everything Naomi had been through. But what it represents in the interior of a woman who had walked back into Bethlehem calling herself bitter, who had stood in front of her community and named her emptiness out loud, who had told the women of the town that the Almighty had dealt bitterly with her, is one of the most profound spiritual shifts that the scriptures record. Because in that quiet sentence, Naomi moved from Mara back toward Naomi. She moved from the language of one who has been abandoned to the language of one who is beginning to perceive the kindness that was present, even in the wilderness. She moved from the posture of someone whose hands are empty to the posture of someone whose eyes are beginning to see what is being placed into those hands. She did not wait until the full restoration was complete before she made that shift. She did not wait until Boaz had married Ruth, and the legal transaction was finalized, and the child was born, and her arms were full again before she allowed herself to say that the kindness of God had not stopped. She said it in the middle. She said it when the evidence was partial, when the provision was beginning but not yet complete, when the story was clearly turning but had not yet arrived at its destination. She said it at the exact moment when the new thing was still springing up, when the stream was still moving beneath the surface, when the restoration was in process rather than in completion. That is the declaration that is available to you right now. Not at the end of your story, not after the full restoration has made the declaration feel safe and obvious and without risk. Right now, in the middle, in the exact season where the evidence is partial and the provision is beginning, and the story is clearly turning. but has not yet arrived at the fullness of what is coming. The declaration that the kindness of God has not stopped, that the arrangement of moments in your life, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones, has been the hand of a God whose kindness towards you has never been interrupted by the circumstances that felt like interruption. The Book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 22 and 23 says, "Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." New every morning. Not new after the wilderness is over. Not new after the restoration is complete. New every morning inside the wilderness, inside the loss, inside the transformation, inside the season where the ground around you still looks dry, even though the stream is already beginning to move beneath it. The compassions of God are not contingent on the visibility of his provision. They are not held back until the external circumstances have aligned with the internal promise. They are present, alive, active, and new in every single morning of every single season, including the mornings that feel most empty, including the mornings that most resemble the ones Naomi woke up to in the foreign land before she found her way back to Bethlehem. You have survived those mornings, more of them than most people around you know about. The mornings where the first conscious thought was the weight of what was lost, and the distance between where you were and where you believed you were meant to be felt like a measurement of failure rather than a map of the journey. The mornings where the compassion of God felt theoretical rather than present, where faithfulness was a word you believed intellectually but could not feel in the interior, where the grief lived. The mornings where you got up and kept moving, not because the faith was strong, but because the frequency inside you refused to stop being oriented toward the source of the signal, even when the signal felt faint. Those mornings were not wasted. They were not evidence of a God who had stopped being new in his compassions towards you. They were the mornings inside the wilderness where the roots of the new thing were going deeper than they could have gone, in the comfort of the life before the loss. Because deep roots require dry seasons. The tree that grows in constant rain develops a shallow root system because the water is always near the surface. The tree that grows through drought sends its roots down to depths that the well-watered tree never reaches. And when the season changes, when the rain returns, when the restoration arrives in its fullness, the tree that grew through the wilderness stands in a way that the tree that never knew drought cannot match. You have been growing roots in the dry season, deep ones, the kind that reach down into sources of sustenance that the comfortable life never required you to find, the kind that connect you to a depth of resource, of strength, of endurance, of knowing that is not available to the ones who have never been asked to find water in the wilderness. And those roots are not going to be pulled up when the restoration arrives. They are going to be the foundation of everything that the restoration builds. On top of them, the depth of the tree is determined in the dry season. The height of the tree is expressed in the season of rain, and the rain is coming. The blessing that has been assigned to your name is not a replacement for what was lost. It is a new thing that could only be built on the specific foundation that the loss created. Naomi did not get her husband and her sons back. What she received was something that the life she had before the loss was not structured to produce. She received Ruth's loyalty and Boaz's covering, and a grandchild placed in her arms by the women of Bethlehem, who said to her, "Your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons." She received a restoration that was not a return to the old chapter, but an arrival in a new one that was larger and more significant and more permanently woven into the fabric of history than the comfortable, ordinary life she had before the loss ever could have been. That is the trajectory you are on. Not back to what was, forward to what is coming. Not a restoration that looks like recovery from loss, but a restoration that looks like arrival at a destination that the loss was always preparing you to reach. Not the old chapter reopened, but a new chapter entered, with the depth and the roots and the frequency and the clarity and the refined interior of a chosen one who has been through the wilderness and come out the other side not diminished but expanded, not broken but restructured, not emptied permanently, but emptied temporarily to be filled with something that the old container was never large enough to hold. The kindness of God has not stopped, not in the mornings that felt empty, not in the season that called itself bitter, not in the nights that were too heavy to carry, and the days that looked too dry to grow anything worth keeping. Not once, in any moment of any chapter of your story, has the kindness of God toward you been interrupted. It has been present in forms that the grief made hard to perceive, and the loss made hard to receive, and the transformation made hard to name. But it has been present. It has been faithful. It has been new every morning, including the mornings that felt like repetitions of the same dry and painful sameness. And now, in this morning of this message, in this specific moment of this specific season of your life, the kindness that has never stopped is becoming more visible. The provision that has been in motion beneath the surface is beginning to break through. The new thing that has been springing up in your wilderness is becoming tall enough to be seen above the dry ground of the season that surrounded it. The stream that has been moving beneath the wasteland is beginning to reach the surface where you can hear it, where you can find it, where you can drink from it with the open hands of a chosen one who has arrived at the harvest after the longest and most refining planting season of their life. You are not at the beginning of this journey. You are approaching the turn that Naomi approached when she said, "The Lord has not stopped showing his kindness." The turn that happens not at the end of the wilderness, but in the middle, when the eyes that have been trained by loss to look carefully at the texture of what is beginning begin to see what the undisciplined eye would still call nothing. You have that eye now. You have earned it, and what it is showing you, if you will trust, it is that the kindness has not stopped. The blessing is already in motion, and the fullness of what has been assigned to your name is closer than every morning of the dry season made it feel. You have walked through something in this message, not just listened to it, walked through it. And there is a difference that the chosen ones who have been through real wilderness understand, in a way that those who have only ever watched from the comfortable distance of an undisturbed life do not. Walking through something leaves a mark on the interior. It deposits something that was not there before, a knowing that is deeper than information, a clarity that is more permanent than insight, a recognition of the self that does not dissolve when the message ends, and the ordinary world resumes its noise around you. What has been deposited in you today is not going to dissolve. The word that found you in this message was not random content that the algorithm served to a passive consumer. It was a prepared word carried by a specific frequency to a specific person at a specific moment in a story that has been moving toward this threshold for longer than you may realize. And what you carry out of this moment, what you take with you back into the geography of your daily life, is the confirmation of something that the losses and the separations and the long inner transformation tried to make you doubt. You are chosen. You were always chosen. And the season that felt most like abandonment was the season in which you were being most precisely prepared. Naomi left Bethlehem full and returned empty. But she did not return finished. She returned to the threshold of a chapter that the fullness of the old life would never have been able to open. The emptying was not the end of her story. It was the necessary interior work of a God who needed more room in her life than the old structure was providing. And what he built in the space that the loss created was something so significant, so permanently woven into the fabric of history, so far beyond what the comfortable life she had before the loss could have contained, that the word restoration does not do it justice. It was not a restoration. It was an elevation, not a return to what was, an arrival at what was always meant to be. That is where you are going, not back. Forward, not to the version of your life that the loss interrupted, to the version that the loss was always clearing space for. And the God who has been faithful through every morning of the dry season, whose compassions have been new every morning, even when the mornings felt identical in their heaviness, who arranged every moment of the wilderness with the precision of a craftsman, who knows exactly what he is building and exactly how long the building requires, that God is not finished with what he started in you. Before this message closes, before the final words are spoken, and you carry what you have received today back into the world that is waiting for the version of you that this season has been building, I want to pray with you, not over you from a distance, with you, because chosen ones were never meant to carry the weight of the threshold alone, and the prayer that is about to be spoken is not a performance. It is a joining of frequencies. It is two chosen ones, separated by whatever distance exists between the voice that recorded this message and the ears that are receiving it, standing together in the presence of the God who knew both of them before he formed them and set both of them apart before they were born. If you are willing, close your eyes for a moment, or keep them open if the closing feels like too much right now. God sees you either way. He has always seen you. He was seeing you on the worst morning of the season you survived. He was seeing you in the foreign land of your loss when you felt most invisible. He is seeing you right now, in this moment, with the full weight of everything you have been through and the full brightness of everything he has prepared for you. And his seeing of you has once been filtered by disappointment, or diminished by the bitterness you named, or interrupted by the transformation that made you unrecognizable to yourself for a season. Father, I bring before you right now the chosen one who has walked through this message. You know their name. You know the specific shape of the loss they survived. You know the exact texture of the separation they carried. You know the interior of the transformation they have been inside, the layers that were removed, the frameworks that were dismantled, the versions of themselves that had to be released before the truest version could emerge. You know the mornings that felt identical in their heaviness and the nights that required more faith than was visibly available. You know all of it. You have always known all of it, and you have never, in any moment of any chapter of their story, stopped being the God whose kindness does not stop and whose compassions are new every morning. I ask right now that what has been spoken in this message would not dissolve when the ordinary world resumes its noise, that the frequency that was activated today would continue to strengthen, that the perception of the new thing springing up in their wilderness would become clearer with every morning that follows this one, that the roots that grew deep in Siwudman now support a flourishing that is visible and lasting and specifically designed for the assignment that has their name written on it in heaven, that the blessing that has been in motion beneath the surface would now break through in forms that are recognizable and receivable, and full enough to confirm what this message has declared. That the chosen one who arrived at this message carrying the weight of the lost and the separated and the unfinished would leave it knowing, in the deepest and most unshakable part of who they are, that they are not Mara permanently. They are Naomi restored. They are Ruth in the field. They are the chosen one at the threshold of the chapter that everything before was always preparing them to enter. Cover them with your faithfulness. Surround their next steps with your arrangement. Let the Boaz of their next season recognize them in the field. Let the harvest that was assigned to their name arrive in its fullness, and let them receive it with the open hands of a chosen one who has learned, through the most costly and the most refining season of their life, that the kindness of God has never stopped. Amen. Carry that prayer with you, not as a religious conclusion to a piece of content, as a living thing that was spoken over a real pardon by the listening before the first word was formed. Long after the final word has settled into the interior, where the chosen ones keep the things that matter most. If this message has carried something real into your life today, if the word that was spoken here has landed in a place that needed to be reached, then let it continue to travel. Share it with someone whose season looks like what yours has looked. Someone whose loss is still fresh, whose separation is still tender, whose transformation is still in the painful middle stages, where the demolition is more visible than the construction. Give them the gift of a message that speaks their language and names their experience and confirms what the wilderness has been working to make them doubt. Like this message as an act of agreement with what was spoken here. Subscribe so that the next word that is being prepared for the next threshold of your journey finds you without you having to search from the beginning again. And if the ministry that creates this space has added something living to your life, if the words that were built here have been worth the hours that went into building them, the link to support this work is in the pinned comment and in the description below. Whatever you are able to give at whatever level fits the season you are in is received with gratitude and used to make sure that the next chosen one who needs this space finds it ready and waiting when they arrive. You came to this message carrying something heavy. You have been seen in it. You have been named in it. You have been prayed over in it, and you leave it not as the same person who arrived, because the word that lands in the right interior at the right moment always changes something, always deposits something, always confirms something that the enemy was working to permanently erase. You are chosen. You were always chosen. The blessing is not waiting on your perfection. It is not waiting on the completion of your transformation, or the resolution of your doubt, or the silencing of the voice that says you are too much or not enough, or too late or too broken. It is waiting on your willingness to receive it, with open hands, with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a chosen one who has survived the wilderness and emerged with roots deep enough to hold everything that the season of rain is about to bring. The crown was never lost. It was being kept safe in the hands of the one who placed it on your head before the world began, and it has your name on it. It has always had your name on it, and nothing that this season took from you took that.